Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the City Council meeting for the City of Edina. It is Tuesday evening, August 20th, 2024, and it is 7:03 p.m. And Director Benarod, I think, told you all that we've been doing these meetings on a hybrid basis all during COVID and thereafter. So folks cannot only come to City Hall to participate in the work that we do at appropriate portions of the agenda, and tonight it's public comment, and there's ways to do it if you're remote, and we've got that number that'll come up on the screen here momentarily. So if you're, this community comment will come up fairly fast. We're going to talk to folks from our community that are here first. This gives folks that are remote a chance to get ready to call in. So there's your call-in number, there's your access code, there's your password, and that, as I said, will come up fairly fast. So having provided that information, I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask our clerk, Sharon Ellison, to call the roll.
Councilmember Jackson.
Here.
Councilmember Pierce.
Here.
Councilmember Risser.
Here.
Councilmember Agnew is absent. Mayor Hovland.
Here. And next is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, folks. And now the next matter on the agenda is the approval of the meeting agenda itself. And is there anyone on the council or from a staff standpoint that wishes to modify or propose modifying the agenda? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda in its published form?
So moved.
Member Jackson moves, Member Pierce seconds the adoption of the meeting agenda in its published form. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adopting the meeting agenda as published, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now we are at community comment. So I'm going to have that number come up on the screen so you can get ready to call in. But first, we're going to turn to any residents we have here with us this evening. And folks know that whether you're here for the first time or this is your frequent flyer, come often, we've got 3 minutes for folks to give their presentation. You'll get a yellow light and amber light when you've got 30 seconds left, and then you should think about wrapping up right around the time we hit the red light so that we treat everybody the same here. So welcome, and please introduce yourself and give us your address.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and residents of Edina. My name is Ralph Zickert. I live at 4311 Cornelia Circle. During the August 15th HRA meeting, the council voted 4-1 in favor of a $23 million proposed gift of city tax revenue to the Macy's site developer. I take exception to that vote and the one-sided presentation that Manager Neal's staff made to justify a yes vote. If we are to take staff's presentation at face value, every new development in the foreseeable future would deserve the gift of TIF. In that August HRA meeting, staff claimed there were 4 hurdles to development in Edina, therefore warranting the gift of TIF. Hurdle number 1.
Mr. Zickert, did you hear the comment by our community communications director? You know, if it's scheduled for a future public hearing, and I think you were at the meeting where this whole TIF matter is going to be scheduled for a future public hearing, and this is more akin.
It's not on the schedule, though. If you want to call up a schedule that has it on the schedule, I'll be glad to step down.
All right.
But is it on a published schedule?
All right,
at this point?
you go ahead, and it's a fair point. You go ahead and finish your thoughts.
In that August HRA meeting, staff claimed there were 4 hurdles to development in Edina, therefore warranting the gift of TIF. Hurdle number 1, high land and remediation costs. So what the developer is saying that he wants us to pay him for being a community with a great reputation and a superb location. As for remediation, did the developer not do their homework before they agreed to pay more than 2 times the property's assessed value? Hurdle number 2, high financing costs. Yes, borrowing costs are up, but you would have to go back to 1950 to match the rates the developers have enjoyed the last 20 years. And now that rates are back to historical norms, the developer wants to pick our pockets. Hurdle number 3, high construction costs. Welcome to the new normal. Has the developer not been to the grocery store lately? Hurdle number 4, high standards for PUD zoning and Edina's development fees. The developer asked for the property to be rezoned to PUD, and spot zoning bestowed upon the site gives the developer almost carte blanche leeway to run roughshod over Edina's setback and site coverage requirements. That, coupled with a blind eye to what is or is not a public benefit, creates an ideal, not an onerous environment for the developer. As for development fees, why would the city charge these fees and then turn around and in effect give them back? Unless maybe it's the collection of some $50 to $70 million into the TIF district cookie jar. So Manager Neal, the HRA presentation referenced a $23 million cost to the city, a figure that does not include the millions of dollars in an interest cost on those bonds. My question is, what is the city's estimate of those interest costs, and why the lack of transparency? Also, the developer claims their rate of return without TIF is too low. However, neither the developer nor the HRA presentation quantifies just how much too low. My question is, do the TIF dollars close the entire gap? And if not, how much more is needed? And again, why the lack of transparency? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zickert. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to address the council on a matter of concern to them? That's, yes, please come forward, Mr. Simpson. Not scheduled for a future public hearing or on the agenda this evening. I think you'd be better off going to the side podium unless you have some overhead that you want to use.
Actually, I talked to the mayor.
Pull that speaker down just a touch, would you? Thank you.
My wife and I received a ticket for expired tabs on our car. And policeman, Edina policeman was there. He was great. You couldn't be prouder of him, the way he handled himself. And so I went to get the tabs at Golden Valley, and I told them the story, and they said, oh, we're messed up. Your ownership of your car isn't right. And so she says, you know, what you need to really do is check with the police department to find out if, you know, what you should do about it. And so, which I did. But what really bothered me, because I couldn't get the sergeant, duty sergeant was out in the field, and I couldn't get a hold of him. So what I did next is I called the receptionist, great person, and I asked, I need to talk to which lawyer? And she gave me the first lawyer. You have 2 lawyers. And he said, nope, that's not my business. He actually was on the phone, called me back 2 minutes later. The other lawyer, which I don't know these names, I called him, and his secretary called back about 10 minutes later, and she said, well, he's not in the office. I don't know when he's going to get back. By the way, all this happened last Tuesday. And then I called the city manager's office, and it said, hey, I'm not in. Call my receptionist or my assistant. I called her 3 times and left 3 messages, and you know what this says on her thing? I'm away from my desk. Doesn't say she's coming back. Doesn't she's on vacation. Nothing. I then called the city manager and left a message. Guess how many people called me back from the city? Anybody want to make a guess? 0. And I really came, and the mayor was really good. I wanted to ask somebody in the city council if they can get staff to talk to poor, common people who just happen to live in the city. I think that's unacceptable. 7 days without any response from the city. You would have thought I would have got one from the city manager, his assistant, right? The lawyer. So I don't know what's the policy here, but is it hiding out, or is it doing the best thing we can do for the people? Because you love spending money, but the last thing I want to say is I live on 509 Blake Road on Peter Simpson, and your city engineer, when he developed that section of road, pat him on the back and take him to lunch. He was so great to the people. Every question, they had a project manager who was like, you make a phone call, 10 minutes later he showed up or he called you. It was amazingly well done, and the job is spectacular. But anyway, I wish maybe you can a motion saying the city has a 24-hour rule to call to get somebody back to you, including the city manager. I know you guys are busy, but I pay the bills, and I'd like a little service. Thank you.
Wait, Mr. Simpson, did you leave your phone number or your contact information with the lieutenant?
The lieutenant was nice, gave his card.
All right, thanks for doing that, and we'll figure out how we can help or guide you to the city attorney that handles criminal matters. All right, thanks, Mr. Simpson.
Are we going to get, did you say something about it to the administration? Staff?
Yeah, I think right now, between the lieutenant and the city manager, your point was well made, and you'll get some response. Thanks for coming in.
Hey, thank you for doing it.
Good evening. My name is Nora Davis, and I live at 6921 Southdale Road in the Lake Cornelia neighborhood. And I'm here tonight because of a safety concern on the roundabouts out here. I don't know if there are any plans for any crossing lights, but I had a rather terrifying experience about a week ago, heading north on 100, getting ready to take the turn to get to work, and there was a massive truck stalled on the entrance to Eden Avenue. I went around him, and all of a sudden, here was a little kid attempting to cross. He was getting ready to enter the crosswalk. He was on a bike. He had his helmet on. But I tell you, I was terrified. Had I not reduced my speed, I'm not sure he would have survived. He did have a helmet, but getting run over by a 6,500-pound vehicle is not good for anyone. So I'm hoping at some point there are some crossing lights around here because people are traveling really fast. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Davis. We'll have our traffic safety people take a look at that issue. Anyone else here in the audience who wish to address the council on a matter of concern to them that's not scheduled for anything on the agenda this evening, or not scheduled on the agenda this evening, or for a future public hearing? Okay. Not seeing anybody coming forward. Do we have anybody online, Director Benarott?
We do not, sir.
Did you say no?
No, she said no.
Okay, all right. I thought you said not yet, but that was, I know that you get disappointed when there's nobody online, so I thought I had better double check with you. All right, so we've got community comment that has been made in chambers, nobody calling in from the virtual world to visit with the city council. And next what we do is we go to the city manager for responses to the community comments that were made at the prior meeting. And there were several of them, I think, as I recall, and my notes reflect. Those were addressed on our website by Friday following that Tuesday meeting. But we'd like to have you give an update verbally as well. And so I will turn to you now, Manager Neal, to give that update.
Thank you, Your Honor. There were a number of speakers at our previous council meeting on the 5th, I believe. And remember that we respond to questions. We don't critique or respond necessarily to opinions or to information that people share. So the first question we had was, what is the status of the Department of Justice inquiry into the accessibility of the Grandview Bridge? The city received a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office, a letter of inquiry on February 12th, 2024. We've responded to that inquiry during the spring, the staff have, and we're waiting to hear from the Department of Justice on next steps, and we have not. When we do, we'll share that with council as fast as we can. The second question was, what was the outcome of recent testing of the Grandview parking ramp? The city hired an engineering firm to assess the the safety and security of the what we call the Jerry's parking ramp. We call it the Jerry's parking ramp, but it is a City of Edina-owned parking structure. We tested it. The data gathered from the testing gives us a sense of what kind of future maintenance we have to do of this parking ramp, which is 40 years old. The core testing that was part of that process that tests the kind of the lasting strength of the concrete and construction has been complete. We're still awaiting results from the contractor, and we'll share those with residents and with the council as well. Finally, there was a question about how is the city responding to area chestnut borer infestations. According to the U.S. Forest Service, two-line chestnut borers primarily attack oak trees, and I think that was the question from the last meeting. Oaks have been defoliated by these insects and debilitated by root disease that's also caused by the chestnut borer. Our city forester has studied this question. He came back with some information that's important to us as we think about how to handle this. According to him, there's about 4,000 oak trees in Edina parks and open spaces, totaling more than 64,000 caliper inches. His estimate, he estimates it would cost about $500,000 every 2 years to keep up with the preventative injections that were discussed at the last meeting. That amount is high, but it might. But taking all these trees down is also a high number too. So we're evaluating both of those numbers to see which one is more prudent for the city.
There was one other issue that one of our residents raised, one of the initial issues that you talked about, and that was his, I don't know if it was his assertion or his musing about whether or not our stormwater management system in Weber Park was causing flooding in Minneapolis. And I think our engineer answered that question and said, no, we work with Minneapolis and we're not causing any flooding issues around Lake Calhoun because of the stormwater management system at Weber.
There's a great deal of discussion and planning that went on with the Minneapolis Park Board, with the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, and the City of Minneapolis, all separate entities, about how we, the system that we wanted to use to manage the flood control elements of the new ponds in Weber Park. So yes, there is a system. People know what that system is, and there's a communication back and forth if there are any concerns about it. And Mr. Mayor, before we move on, I do want to introduce Leah Koch. Leah is an attorney with Campbell Knutson, and she is subbing tonight for Dave Kendall.
Nice to meet you all. Nice to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for being here with us. The next part of the agenda is the consent agenda. There are a number of items that are typically handled on a single motion that are embraced within that consent agenda, and we want to remove, I think, item 6.7. Councilmember Jackson wants to remove item 6.7 for discussion. With the exception of item 6.7, is there a motion to adopt the items on the consent agenda in a single motion?
So moved.
Second. Jackson moves. Member Pierce seconds the adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion with the exception of item 6.7. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. The consent agenda is approved with the exception of item 6.7, which we will turn to now and go to Councilmember Jackson for her inquiry on that matter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So,
And why don't you explain what the matter is too, so that that's clear?
I shall. In April of 16th of 2024, we've received a petition from the White Oaks neighborhood. And this is not the first time they've contacted us about sidewalks on 48th and 49th Street. There's parking on there, it's very dangerous, and they continue to have concerns. And I share those concerns. This is close to one of our most pedestrian-friendly shopping districts. People walk there for the art fair, and this was a request to have sidewalks put in 2027. And with that being rejected, there is no foreseeable path to sidewalk in the lifetime while the little kids are little. That's 3 years away. And so I'm really concerned about the pedestrian safety on these two these two streets. And I wanted to revisit that. So I see Mr. Scipione.
Thank you, Member Jackson. So as I mentioned in the staff report, what
You
really comes...
identify yourself too for
I'm
folks
sorry.
in the audience? Thank you.
Andrew Scipione, Transportation Planner. What it really comes down to is our available budget and how we prioritize our projects. We use a set of equity criteria right now that looks at characteristics of the neighborhood, that looks at connectivity to transit, to parks, to schools, as well as how these projects tie into our pavement management program and what other funding opportunities are available. So based on that, there's a list of projects in the report that are noted as having higher priority based on those criteria. Those include facilities on France Avenue, on Olinger Boulevard, Wooddale Avenue, and McCully Trail. So if we were to move up construction of these sidewalks, we would have to delay one or more of those projects in order to accommodate it.
So I understand that. Thank you for that explanation. This is going to be access to our new E-line that's coming down France Avenue. There's no transit on the west side of town. There's no transit on Olinger Boulevard. And I know that's near a countryside school, but this is, I understand that you have a system for going through this. I just really disagree strongly because this is a dangerous part of town that we're really promoting pedestrian activity in. And, you know, some of these other places, there's a lot less pedestrian activity of varied sorts. And so even though I will lose the vote, I don't approve of this because the White Oaks folks really feel very passionately about the safety of these two streets and the sidewalk situation. So I wanted to pull it off.
Are there other council members that want to address this issue? Understanding that we have a system in place, just a higher level observation, I guess, is that I've been on this council long enough where I was here in a period of time when really no neighborhood wanted sidewalks. Now we're getting more and more neighborhoods that want sidewalks, which is a great thing to separate people from traffic. So there are still parts of our town that probably don't need them because they're quiet and safe. And with respect to roadway traffic, particularly on the west side, but this is a tight neighborhood over there. I agree with Councilmember Jackson. I was surprised when we weren't going to be able to respond to this request, but nonetheless, what you're requesting is that the staff recommendation to proceed with the scheduled mill and overlay of the roadway through White Oaks be approved, and that we defer sidewalk construction and street narrowing to a later date.
Yes, that is correct.
Right. Councilmember Pierce.
So I guess I don't necessarily have an issue with that, but it makes me think about like process again. So I don't know how we would make a decision to move White Oak up without having a conversation about everything that's in and why it's there. And so to me, it's just difficult today to just say, yeah, let's move it without having a deeper conversation. And so I'm not quite sure how to do that, but I do think it could be warranted to have the conversation. And so I say all of that saying we may very well decide to stick with the staff report. But that's where my head is on it.
Member Risser.
I agree with Member Pierce, and also just looking at the schedule of road construction. You know, my eye has been on the President's area for a long time, and I know that's coming up, and, you know, sequencing is important. However, I do want to ask, is there anything that could be done to encourage pedestrian safety that does not require the road construction? Like, are there intermediate things that could be done between now and then? Signage or something? I don't know. I know Richfield, they painted the roads for a safe pathway to schools, and they actually painted the street. I don't know if that could be a temporary thing, or is there any kind of creative thing you could do?
Sure, thank you for the question. There are a number of temporary solutions we could try. In the past, we've painted temporary curb extensions, for example. We did that in the South Cornelia neighborhood a few years ago with limited success. Richfield, for example, has recently painted an on-street pedestrian facility on 69th Street. That's something we could look at. I would want to engage with the neighborhood because that would have impacts to on-street parking. But that's something we could potentially try in the next couple of years and pilot it and see how the neighborhood responds to it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jackson, do you want to have a follow-on?
I do. I want to thank Member Risser for asking the question because, yeah, if there's anything we can do, I strongly encourage that to happen. I understand the process around road reconstruction, and I wasn't asking to interrupt that, but I just wanted to say something on behalf of that neighborhood because it is an urgent issue for them. And if we can find something that's short of road reconstruction to make it safer, I would really appreciate that.
Manager Neal, did
No,
you
I'm
have
just
anything? Okay.
acknowledging we can do
All right.
that.
Member Pierce, do you move the approval of the staff recommendation to proceed with scheduled overlay and defer sidewalk construction and street narrowing in the White Oaks neighborhood?
Yes. No. Close. But then I have a question again, and I hate that I'm doing this. Just we're still on the consent agenda. I agree with Member Risser saying it makes sense to look, but how do we make sure that gets done? So that's not what the petition actually has that as line item number 2, saying can we incorporate road calming techniques into the design? But I think the way that was originally written, they were thinking when you do the street reconstruction. And so I would want to ask if we approve this, I would want us to also say that we will go to the neighborhood and see what other techniques we could do to alleviate the issue. And so, but that's not the way this resolution is written.
You want to address
I just
speed?
wanted-
I mean, we're talking speed and volume here, so.
Yes. I
What calming
just
measures
wanted-
can we employ?
Well, first, I just wanted to clarify that the request was to coordinate the timing of sidewalk installation with the overlay. Just want to be sure to differentiate between an overlay versus a full reconstruction.
Okay. But my point's still the same. So now we're saying we're not going to do any of that. Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to say we're going to leave it the way it is.
No, we're going to do the overlay.
But we're not moving it up on the.
No, but it's an overlay, not a reconstruction.
Understand that. I'm with you on that.
Okay.
So what we're proposing is that we proceed with the overlay in 27 that is scheduled. As far as the sidewalk schedule, that would fall into the current prioritization of sidewalks. So right now, that's outside of our projected 6-year timeframe. So sometime after that, we do reevaluate that prioritization every year based on available funding and based on how the demographics of our community change. So there's a possibility that it could come sooner in that prioritization. But as I mentioned, also some of these projects we've already engaged with property owners on. We've already started preliminary design. So if we were to delay those projects, that would set that work back.
So staff recommends proceeding with scheduled overlay and defer sidewalk construction and street narrowing as part of the future construction. That's what's in here. I am saying, can we do the work to see if there are temporary ways that we could do calming to address some of the safety issues on that road? And how do we do that, given that this is the vote that's before us?
Sure. If you would like to give staff that direction, we can come back to you at a later council meeting with more information on those specific costs and what impact they may have to the PAX fund. Again, this overlay is not scheduled for 27, so we do still have some time to make a definitive decision on it.
Okay.
And we can create a report and have that enclosed in a future packet for you and note it.
Okay.
But I think what I heard from Member Pierce, at least the inference, and Member Jackson, is sooner rather than later with respect to traffic calming. So not to come back in a year and say, well, we could do this in 2026. I mean, we're talking about right now. What can we do about traffic calming in the White Oaks neighborhood to help them out? So what's your answer to that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
What can we do now to assist with traffic calming in the White Oaks neighborhood until we get to the point where you're going to do the mill and overlay in 2027, and then it gets sidewalks somewhere beyond that time?
That's something that, I think it was mentioned before, our Traffic Safety Committee has looked at, and based on the data that we've collected, the Traffic Safety Committee didn't recommend any action at that time. So the speeds are slightly above the posted 25 mile per hour speed limit, but there are other areas in town where speeds are much higher than that, and that's where we're trying to prioritize our efforts.
My question was not about traffic calming. It was about being in a stroller on a street where there's cars parked and you have to go into the middle of the street in order to take your kid for a walk. If you want to go to the Walgreens, you have to go down one of these streets, and it's very dangerous. And there are cars parked there. So it's not about traffic calming for me. It's about a sidewalk substitute. And Member Risser threw out a couple of different interesting ideas. And can you just come back to us and say, these are some of the ideas for sidewalk, faux sidewalks, as it were? And we looked at them, and these are the trade-offs that the neighborhood would face, whether it's no parking, or maybe no parking after 6 p.m. if it's business parking or whatever, but come back to us with some options so that this neighborhood can walk to France and take the bus that's going to be there safely. And it doesn't have to be street reconstruction, it doesn't have to be street redesign, but if there's something that we can do in the interim that will help improve the lives of this neighborhood, which, I used to live in that neighborhood, and that was 24 years ago, and it's been a problem that entire time. And it's just a very dangerous couple of streets for people on foot. And that's what I'm asking for, is a staff ideas generation. Here are 5 ideas. This is the cost. These are the trade-offs. Can we do something? It doesn't have to be traffic calming, but I'd like to see some sort of way for pedestrians to get safely across that area of town. And that's my request.
Yeah, we could certainly prepare a report like that and bring it back to you.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Let me see if I can reframe a motion that might be acceptable. So the action requested would be to approve the staff recommendation to proceed with scheduled overlay in 2027 and defer sidewalk construction and street narrowing to a subsequent schedule, but on an interim basis, direct staff to come back with some ideas to enhance safety in the White Oaks neighborhood.
So moved.
Okay.
Motion by Member Pierce, a tie on the second.
You can give it to Julie.
Member Risser, thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right, that completes the items on the consent agenda for us this evening. And thanks for being here, Mr. Scipione. Next on the agenda is something we typically have on the agenda, and we've got special recognitions and presentations coming up. There's a couple items on here, and we're going to get a really interesting report in the second part of this section of the agenda on the Fred Richards Park Master Plan work that's been going on. But we have been, over the past several months, bringing all of the state champions into City Hall to kind of celebrate them, whether it's a team or individuals. And we actually ran out of time before school ended, but we're fortunate tonight we have a chance to both recognize the Edina High School debate team, but we have a individual state champion with us tonight, Devarsh Bara, and his mother, and the coach, Joseph Schmidt, is here as well. And so I want to have you come up. We want to give you a hearty round of congratulations. Seeing the coach with his suit and tie on, just like some of us do on a regular basis, reminded me we went over to the state legislature with all of the winning teams, robotics, debate, hockey, girls, hockey, boys. It was badminton, all these people in the House chambers. And the people that were dressed up the best were the debaters. Not just the coach, but the debaters. I think they all had sport coats and ties on. And they were totally comfortable in that environment. The hockey players, not so much. They were looking around wondering, where's the exit? I got to get out of here. I got too much energy to deal with this. But the debaters were there, and we had some wonderful group photos with Heather Edelson. And so, Coach, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your state champion debater, and then we'll let this young man, Mr. Barra, talk about his success.
Sure. So there are 4 major types of debate in Minnesota. One of the types of debate is congressional debate, which Devarsh participated in, and he was the state champion. I'll note also that he is a junior, so he is a returning state champion. He'll be competing next year, his senior year. His teammate, Pranika Kumar, was second. She is a sophomore. I guess she's a rising junior now, so she'll be back as well. And they'll both be, I hope, competing at the state tournament in congressional debate next year. We also had competitors compete and advance to the quarterfinals or semifinals or finals in the other 3 types of debate. In Lincoln Douglas debate, Aditi Jha was as a freshman in the final round, and Valerie Schmidt as a sophomore was in the semifinal round. In policy debate, Joe Adam and Kaushik Chava were in the semifinals, and they are juniors, so they're back. And finally, in public forum debate, we had Claire Watts and Sadie Slobin, who as juniors were in the quarterfinals. So all 4 types of debate, those people are all back, and we'll be looking to see how they do this next year. And our champion is Devarsh.
Thank you, Coach Schmidt. Devarsh, welcome.
Yeah, hi.
And
Thank you so much for having
again.
me. Sorry, what did you say?
Congratulations again.
Oh, thank you very much. It means a lot to me to be here, so thank you very much.
Any comment for the council or for the residents that are going to be able to watch this? Watch you on. Well, maybe Member Jackson has a question for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about, what did you speak about in the competition?
So the type of debate that I do is called congressional debate. So we essentially simulate being members of the U.S. Congress, and we debate on particular pieces of legislation that we're given. So specifically in the state tournament, in the preliminary session, we had around 16 different bills that we were given, and that was a lot of research, but we talked about either on the pro or against. And in the final round specifically, the 2 pieces of legislation that I personally debated on was, one, a bill to remove sanctions on the country of Venezuela, and the second bill that I debated on was a bill to implement ranked choice voting systems all across the United States.
Wow, that's a range.
I know, it certainly is.
Congratulations,
Yeah,
wow.
thank you.
All right, we're going to come down and have a photo. I'm going to bring the rest of the council members with me so we can have a photo with you. And then we're going to have your mother come up too.
He's not going to be very happy about that. You're welcome.
Well, that was fun. That's a great young guy. All right, let's go to the Fred Richards Park Master Plan, and going to bring up Perry Vetter, our Park and Rec Director, who's going to lead off the conversation.
Thank you, mayors and council. This evening before you, we are going to review the engagement and preliminary design for the Fred Richards Park Master Plan. Hopefully it is less complex than sanctions on Venezuela. So hopefully you enjoy this evening. What a great honor. What a great award and participation. So just a little bit of background. Fred Richards Park is being created out of the old Fred Richards golf course. It's a 43-acre site. That site is bisected by the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail. That was a partnership between the City of Edina, 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, and Three Rivers Park District. The master plan itself was adopted in July of 2017, and it has come to fruition because of a voter-approved referendum for a local option sales tax here in Edina. There are 3 goals for our park that came out of the referendum. That's to restore nature's role with a wetland banking system, to create pathways for play and health with a great lawn and loop area, and to invite the whole community with a central green. So tonight you'll hear more details about our refined design, how the community has been engaged, and how we found a path forward with our regulatory agencies. This project is being led by Rachel Finberg, our parks planner, and our design team from Confluence. We have one request for you tonight, is that to provide us feedback and comments on the design so we can work towards implementation. So we're not asking you for any vote or motion this evening. So next, I'd like to introduce Terry Monarch and Mo Convery from Confluence, and they will review the Fred Richards Park Plan.
Thank you, Director Vetter.
I mean, it's up to you.
I'll sing the hybrids.
Thanks. Mayor, Council, thank you for having us tonight. Terry Monarch, Principal with Confluence, our Minneapolis office.
And I'm Mo Convery. I'm a landscape architect at Confluence as well.
Great, thank you for having us. Well, we're super excited about this project. We started this project in 2016. It's been in the works. I think we wrapped up the master plan in 2018 and then waited for the powers to be to make the referendum happen, and now we're envisioning this in its full scale. So I don't know if you remember the original plan. Some of you may have seen it before. If not, it's part of your packet tonight. But the original plan talked about a lot of the principles that Perry was mentioning earlier on. The unique thing about this is the existing golf course was kind of sinking. It's built on, kind of a spongy, more marshy type historical property. So what we were thinking of doing in that original concept was to convert that back to a nature wetland bank and actually use it as part of a wetland bank for the county, which would generate revenue for the city as well, but also creating this kind of unique natural area within the heart of Edina and within the heart of an urban core of a city, and making it back into its best use purpose. The other side of the site, we're looking at programming that more for people, social interaction, activation, health and wellness, recreation. So a lot of things Perry talked about with the trails and the walking paths, but also some smaller kind of passive recreation. We have no activated sports or programmed sports here. It's more about passive interactive recreation. And then we were planning kind of a very unique, inclusive playground that was themed around some of those basic things. There was another component of this that went up to the north. We kind of always called it the Panhandle. That area was kind of seen as maybe a loop trail, could have maybe a bike skills course or something, but over time and revisiting the project now as we come back to it, we've began to take a look at a lot of different opportunities. So as you can see, this was kind of some of the ideas with the wetland bank to kind of excavate. This would also help local flood storage for larger events as well. The cross-section kind of shows what that idea and thought was, actually working with the authorities and our ecologists and our engineers. We've kind of refined that in the way or form, and I was quite surprised that wetland banks aren't always full of water. They're actually mostly meadow and open space, but that's something that we learned as part of the process. So we refined the plan. We took another look at it. After meeting with the authorities, the watersheds and some of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and those sorts, they were kind of talking to us about, well, you're covering up some of the existing basins of water that have become wetlands over time that were part of the golf course. Can we not do that? You can kind of see in the previous plan, if you look primarily like right in the middle there where there's water showing, we were showing kind of more of a central green and different things there as well. So what we did is we went back and looked at the plan, and they really challenged us to kind of identify some other opportunities. And we actually thought it made the project better. We think the project is getting better from this. So not only with the wetland bank and how we're approaching that, but also with what we've done within the park space as well. So we've made transformations to the playground. It's become a lot more longer and lineal. It has a real strong nature theme. The repurpose of the existing clubhouse has kind of become secondary now. We have a central pavilion that we're looking at, but the clubhouse will still be repurposed. The central lawn is slightly shifted. The larger, more active lawn and hill for sledding has become a little more morphic, so it even more so reduces the use for larger athletics, but also creates a lot more pockets for activity. The Northern Panhandle has become a food forest, which we're very excited about. It'll be a sanctuary for birds, but also a place for people to forage and actually eat food throughout the space at different times of the year. And then our parking has really become a lot more consolidated and actually extends further into the park, which allows people to get closer to the activities and not have to walk from a perimeter. So all these things in combination, I think, have really improved the plan over time. So some of the things was reorienting that entry drive. We did get approvals to have that new entry road construction. I think it was a few months ago that was actually passed here. So that's been built and construction so that it provides us a grand new entry to Fred Richards. As you know before, it came through a parking lot of an existing apartment and office space building. So it really wasn't an identified space, so that really helps in kind of identifying the entry to the park. The flex lawn kind of got smaller. We had to deal with building some spaces over existing water treatment facilities as well, so kind of working in around those. It's kind of a mixed bag, mixed palette on this as well. And then also the maintenance building, we were actually removing that and kind of coming up with a more consolidated maintenance type of solution here as well. Again, bike skills replaced with the food forest, bird sanctuary. The boardwalk, we found out through the wetland process that we had to kind of have a light touch on what we're doing there, so we kind of reduced the size of the boardwalk, made it more of a contained loop that's separate from 9 Mile Creek Trail, which makes it actually more beneficial for people to kind of engage and have interpretive aspects to it and keeps them safe from bike and pedestrian traffic. And then, like I said, with the clubhouse, we could repurpose it in some way. We are going to repurpose it and use it for a meeting space, maybe a trailhead for 9 Mile Creek. We'll still use those restrooms, but we realize we need more accessible restrooms that can accommodate some of the modern conveniences that are needed, but also that type of space and just creating a whole new space for activation and gathering. There may be a food opportunity there as well. So I think it's really helped us and kind of redevelop the plan. So these are some of the images, just some quick modeling of it. You can kind of see that central open lawn, the new park pavilion, the larger flex lawn, and the sledding hill in the background. 9 Mile Creek's kind of on the left side of this, the new parking lot over to the right. We do have pickleball still that we're maintaining here, some basketball courts that relate well to the existing park and that community that's over on the east, and then the activated play area that has a variety of different sensory and inclusion things that Mo will talk a little bit about here as well. And just another shot kind of showing some of these things and some of the possible uses and activation of this space. So I'll let Mo take over.
Thanks, Terry. So a big, kind of a very special component of this park, I know one that we're particularly excited to work on, is this unique play opportunity. We are developing it as a all-inclusive nature play space. And what that means is it's basically going to have play features and accessible routes for every single park user, no matter your age or ability. This is actually quite challenging to do in terms of nature play. So nature play is usually defined as a space that has natural elements, down logs, wood mulch, things like that, things that might be in conflict with our best practices around ADA accessibility. But we know that nature play in and of itself is extremely beneficial to all of us. So part of our challenge for this project is how we blend those two needs in one space to make a fully inclusive nature play space. So this goes through kind of how some examples, some precedents that we're looking at, and some play equipment in particular that we are looking at potentially using in the park. It's still being developed, so we will be actually coming back with more information on that later, but just to give you an idea of general character. So you can see a lot of natural materials, the use of topography for a play element in and of itself. And a particularly special thing for this park is the use of sensory play elements. So this is particularly valuable for individuals of neurodiversity, but it benefits each and every one of us. So how we see the world, how we hear the world, how we move through space, there are play features that really help us come and connect with those senses. So I know we went into some detail on this earlier. This is just giving you an overview of what this could look like. So it's actually going to be a living system, so it's going to take some time to develop. The first few years, it's really going to look very open, I shall say, lots of mud, lots of plant starts. But over time, within actually just a few years, it's really going to fill into a beautiful meadow. So this was a key component of talking to the community of, you're not going to have a rose garden overnight in your backyard. It is a living system that's going to take some time, but it is going to be beautiful. And Terry also introduced the wetland bank and panhandle. This is another key ecological feature of the site. We're using the existing topography to our advantage in this space in particular. So it's built in a bit of a low-lying area. Thanks. And so this is great for birds in particular. So we're going to be planting some native edible landscaping, so things like maple trees that could be used for maple syrup, raspberries, mulberries, American hazelnuts, things that people could go and kind of learn about foraging, but also benefit the birds as well. In the same vein as the health and accessibility, we are really pulling this accessibility throughout the entire park. So we are having key access points, but areas for people to rest and pull off the trail, maybe take a little space if they get a little overwhelmed by their sensory conditions of the park, but really making sure that we're carrying that through in all of our best practices in design. This is just a slide showing the character that we're trying to achieve. So we're using a lot of natural images as our inspiration, thinking about how we use wood and metal. We're also going to be pursuing a site certification for sustainability. So this ties into that overall vision of connecting to nature. So over the past 2 months, the wonderful city staff here has gone out into the community and shared where we're at in the process. The community actually saw the very slides that we're looking at here over the past, again, few months. All around, it was a very positive feedback that we've heard. I think the biggest thing that was kind of carried through as a theme was that people really appreciated that they felt that the park's design is in the spirit of what the master plan was. So we heard, connection to nature, health and wellness, accessibility. We're carrying that through, and we hope to do that to the end as well. So where we are in the schedule, so we are in schematic design development. So we are basically taking the master plan and developing it in more detail, giving it materials, giving it shape, giving it form. We're going to be basically doing that through the end of the year, and we hope to move into construction in the spring of 2025. We like to put an asterisk with this in that we are going through the regulatory process as well, and going to construction is dependent on that. So this is our current schedule at the moment, but just as a thought. All right.
Yeah, if you have any questions or comments, we'd love to help you.
Well, thank you. I remember, I think maybe several of us were out there. July 8th session you had at Centennial Lakes was so well attended, and people were so positive. So I want to really thank you for the excellent work that you've done in being responsive to what folks in our community thought would be important elements, building some of those things in, and really creating something on that 42 acres. It's astounding. And thank goodness our voters said we could use local option sales tax to do this work, and it's going to be a fabulous amenity. So, Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, first of all, this is spectacular. Thank you so much. I'm like, I want to go play. It's just wonderful. And all the thoughtfulness that went into it. And I want to thank everybody who showed up to give comments. It was interesting listening to what other people were saying too. It was like, wow, that's really a thoughtful thing. So it was high quality engagement. The question I have for you is, We have a cost limit that we can spend on this that was limited by the voters, and that's the process for getting the local option sales tax. How are we doing with it, staying within that budget with this design?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we came with some of these concepts and we got to a schematic design 30% level, and the city was like, well, okay, where are we at with costs? So we put together some costing based on some of our current construction numbers and people we know in the industry, and we actually came in really close. I think with some juggling we'll be right at the number, but we're slightly over a little bit right now where we thought we would be, but I think it came in relatively close, and I think we can make modifications to the plan and the layout. We oversized a few things just with anticipation of trying to make this the greatest thing ever, so we can dial those back a bit, but still not lose a lot of the functionality and the excitement and the amenities that it offers to the space. So, but moving forward, we'll actually be engaging a professional level cost estimating construction management type group to kind of give us more even accurate numbers as we move forward. So.
We're close, but we're not perfectly tied out on every penny yet.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
All right, well, yeah, Member Pierce, go ahead.
Thank you. So I had 3 questions. This is, it looks fabulous. It kind of makes me think about like Disneyland or something when I see it. Really nice job. So I had 3 questions, and this is a great slide for these. The quiet zone entry, how do you have a quiet zone? What is a quiet zone in the context of all the other activity that you've got going on there?
That's a great question. So kind of a little background of why we included it. Because it is going to be a playground that we're looking for more inclusion around neurodiversity, we wanted to create areas of different, basically, volumes. So when you typically enter a playground, it's just kind of a wall of sound, right? And so we do have a primary entrance. You can see the general entry there. We aligned all of the pathways to really direct and funnel people there. But for those families that might need a little bit softer entry into the playground, we added that second entry. It's to the south, and I'll actually go back a couple of slides. It is located just kind of to the left of 14, whereas most people will be entering kind of around 12 up here. So again, it's just kind of a soft landing. There's not going to be any rules around this. We're using kind of design strategies to really guide people there. It's going to be a little smaller scale, so that's not where your eye's going to be. And we're going to be actually developing signage as a big component of this. That's one of the things we heard from our accessibility group that we are working on, who's going to be reviewing these designs, is communication is key. So that's basically how we're going to market.
Okay, all right, thank you. Second question, you have outlined, go back to the other, you've got the ADA routes on here, right? My question is, in the different zones, how are we making sure those zones are ADA accessible, I guess, yeah.
I could start. But all of the surfacing that we're proposing and using in this playground area design is a poured in place. We may have some other sensory areas like sand if we have a little water play area, or we might use some wood chips under some certain areas just to give the diversity of experience. But we're also using the topography, as Mo said, to our advantage to be able to create the accessibility to the tower. So by us being able to circulate around the perimeter of the play area, we can get up to a higher level, actually cross over into the gathering space to get to the slides, but also have a higher elevation access into the tower. We wanted to avoid the idea of ramps to get everybody around. So we wanted to feel like it was a natural process. I think the biggest thing we could try to achieve here would be, this is a playground, and you don't notice any of the special things we're doing to make it special for everybody. But we want everybody to be able to experience it the same way. So if we don't consciously make efforts that say, well, there's a ramp for somebody in a wheelchair to get up, but hey, here's a really cool way to get to the tower, right? Whether you're in a wheelchair or not, that's part of the experience. So if we can make a playground that nobody can even tell that we've done anything, I think we're going to check the box on that. But I don't know if you want to add to that. But
yeah, just to support that, going into the kind of the details of the the actual play equipment too. So we are working with some great fabricators, some manufacturers of play equipment that basically do hidden accessibility features throughout it. Again, it doesn't stand out, but you can read it as such. So there's places for people to transfer out of wheelchairs. There's areas that kids can go and kind of tuck in that are a little more enclosed. So kind of following those best practices once you actually get to the equipment as well.
So I love that concept. So thank you for that explanation. And then the last question is just a maintenance question. When you described, and this is probably just because of the way you described the wetland and the nature playground, did I say that right? I assume the maintenance of that is different from the park, at any other city park that we have. And so what's the maintenance requirement for something
So
like
the wetland
that?
bank and the playground are separated. You kind of by 9 Mile Creek Trail. The wetland bank will actually have a maintenance kind of process that it's part of actually creating a wetland bank. I think it's like a 5-year process that you have to do certain things over time to make sure it's limited with weed growth and it's developing the way it's supposed to be, reseed if things aren't taking. So there's a process to that wetland bank maintenance. Once it is established, then there is still a maintenance process because it's a wetland bank. So you got to make sure that it's still operating as a designed wetland bank. So there is a process to that component. Some of the existing wetlands on here will just be maintaining, will actually be enhancing a lot of them. They filled in with a lot of sediment over time, so actually be cleaning them up, getting rid of a lot of the invasives. There's a lot of buckthorn in and around them and invasive species. So we'll be cleaning all those up and making them a lot more higher quality wetlands as part of this process. But then within the play, we're hoping with the rubber surfacing and a lot of the attention to detail of the circulation through the space that the maintenance will be easier. And then working with city staff, we've kind of talked about their key access points, what type of vehicles they'll be using to get through the site, how they need to get to the water treatment plant and service that as well, where they can be able to store maintenance vehicles, and then just in general kind of trying to improve the overall access and maintainability of the site.
Excellent. Thank you. Nice work. Thank you.
Member Risser.
Thank you. Can we go to this is a great place to start, and there's so much wonderful equipment and things that you're doing right here, and I really appreciate that. Can you go to the overall view that shows the secondary entrances?
Other way. There. Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah.
This is okay. I think there was another one where there were little orange dots, but this is fine. My concern is when we look at the playground that exists right now, playground represented by the letter A over on Park Lawn, the bridge, and I haven't been there for a couple of years, but it's really kind of hard to negotiate, and it rises up. Is there a plan to replace that bridge?
The bridge is actually in decent condition, but we are going to kind of do what we can to make it look and feel better. The biggest issue with the bridge currently is the grade access to the bridge. It's kind of sunken and dropped as you try to enter onto the bridge, plus all of the overgrowth of the buckthorn and understory around it. We'll be cleaning all that up. We're actually going to make that wetland 1, which is its technical term. We're going to make that one actually a lot more higher quality wetland. We're going to take down some of the slope, increase the water depth because it's silted over time. So that access point to that bridge and across that bridge will be a lot more defined and a lot more accessible than it is currently.
Will it be ADA compliant?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The whole site is. We've defined the whole site to be ADA compliant. So.
Okay.
Even the boardwalk itself.
Okay, good. Other questions? That prompt anything else? All right, yeah. Well, thanks for the great work you're doing.
Thank you.
Mr. Menard. Yep. Thank you, Ms. Convery, for being here as well. And Director Vetter, thanks for bringing the folks in. And everybody else, thank you for the good work that's going on. We're really appreciative of it. And I know our residents are as well. All right. Another exciting thing to talk about coming up in the next section of the agenda, the reports and recommendations portion of it. You know, we've got a lot of really generous people in our community, and one of our longtime residents, General Denny Schulstead, a few years ago, his wife passed away, his wife Pam passed away, and they loved their golden retriever, and we ended up, I think, just a year or so ago with a beautiful golden retriever sculpture at Centennial Lakes, and we're so appreciative of that. And then he came up with another idea to make another major gift to our community. And Tiffany Bushland, where is Tiffany? There she is. Couldn't quite see her behind the monitor. I know we've got General Scholstad with us here, and we want to bring him up. I think you want to talk a little bit about him, and then we'll have him come up and talk about what caused him to think about this in addition to what he's done already at Centennial Lakes.
Manager of Centennial Lakes Park, and I'm honored to be here today with Dennis Schulstead, who desires to make an artwork donation to the city of Edina to be placed at Centennial Lakes Park. The artwork is titled Stealth, and it is an 8-foot-tall gray heron statue made of stainless steel. It is absolutely beautiful. And we, Denny and I have found a wonderful place along the southern channel at Centennial Lakes Park to place this statue. And let me tell you, Denny's generosity to the community and to the visitors of Centennial Lakes Park is just wonderful. We are very honored to have him in our community, and it's just really, really great to have him here. Denny saw this artwork at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, and he reached out to the mayor and myself and said, hey, can we place that at Centennial Lakes Park? And how cool is that he saw this in the out at the Landscape Arboretum and decided to purchase this artwork to be placed at Centennial Lakes Park if you guys do accept that. So Denny is here in the audience today.
Have you got a slide, Ms. Bushland?
I do have a picture of the...
Oh, yeah, let's... Yeah, beautiful.
So yeah, we'll be, September 9th is the planned install, if this is approved. The artist will be in town for her show at the Landscape Arboretum and will help with the installation process. And Denny has generously donated to pour a concrete pad for the place where this will sit. So.
All right, Denny, you want to come up? We want to...
I have nothing to add. Tiffany does a great job at the park.
We're gonna drag you up here momentarily, I think, just to help celebrate. We're gonna pass this resolution and have you come up so we can celebrate you a little bit for this generous contribution. So we've got a resolution in front of us. Of course, we know that when we get a proposed gift, we have to accept it with a supermajority vote. So Resolution 2024-53 accepts this donation on behalf of the City of Edina by General Denny Schulstead to the city. It's artwork valued at $28,000, and there's some preparation costs he's going to cover as well. We've got a great location for it. So is there a motion to approve Resolution 2024-53, which accepts into our Park and Rec Department at Centennial Lakes Park the donation in the value of $29,500 for artwork and installation from Dennis W. Schulstead?
So moved.
Second.
Marissa moves, Member Jackson seconds the adoption of Resolution 2024-53. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of Resolution 2024-53 say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried? It's a done deal. Come on up. Denny, come on up. We want to thank you.
Well, I just hope that this encourages other people to contribute to public art. I have no artistic ability, but I can write a check, and so we can hire somebody else to do it. And I think this would be a nice addition to Centennial Lakes, and Tiffany does such a good job of maintaining and improving that wonderful park area. So thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, hold on, Denny.
Yeah, tell us the story about, we were at the Landscape Arboretum.
I'm sorry, I don't hear very well.
Okay, you were at the Landscape Arboretum, and you're walking around. Tell us what drew this to you, what you saw it, and what moved you about the statue.
Well, I go to the Arboretum quite often, and this was a traveling exhibit.
Okay.
And the artist is moving everything out on September 9th. And I thought, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have this stay and be at Centennial Lakes? And so I made a donation to the Arboretum and bought the piece of art from the artist.
Wow, thank you so much.
And Tiffany made it very easy for me to do it.
That's great.
All right. Thanks, Denny.
Thank you.
Thanks. Another round of applause. All right, we have one other donation to deal with this evening, and that is from Tom Matson, a memorial bench at Roslyn Park valued at $3,200. That's embodied in Resolution 2024-54. So is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2024-54, which would accept the donation of the funds for the memorial park bench at Roslyn Park by Tom Matson?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Member Pierce moves, Member Jackson seconds the adoption of Resolution 2024-54, dealing with the donation of $3,200 by Tom Matson for a memorial bench at Roslyn Park. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of Resolution 2024-54, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Resolution 2024-54 is adopted. And we thank Tom Matson, and we'll get a letter out to him and General Scholstedt as well, thanking them on behalf of the city of Edina. The next matter in this portion of the agenda, the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda, is something we've been working on for a while. It's been through the Planning Commission, and that's Resolution 2024-50 and Ordinance Number 2024-05, which is preliminary site plan review and zoning ordinance amendment proposed for 7200 France Avenue. Our Community Development Director, Kerry Teague, has the introduction on the matter, and we've got some of the applicants here to answer questions. And we've had some of our residents send in questions. Member Jackson and I met with some of the residents last night for, I don't know, an hour and a half or so, and we embodied their questions and brought them back, and some of them I think are in the writing that was submitted from one of our residents, and I think you've had that in your possession and prepared to address some of those issues as well. So let's go ahead and have you make your presentation, and then we'll think about addressing some of these issues. Thank you.
I will. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So as mentioned, this is a preliminary site plan. It is for Phase 2 of PUD 16, the zoning that was placed on this site back in 2023. This would be first reading of that ordinance amendment that amends that PUD 16 zoning district. The changes that are proposed within that ordinance would be reducing the first floor height from 16 feet to 14 feet, and then incorporating this site plan into the ordinance. With PUDs, the site plans essentially become the zoning. This is what has to be built with the site. So the Phase 2 would be placed into the ordinance as well. The current ordinance allows up to a 72-foot tall building for Phase 2. Phase 1, the height limit is 76 feet. That was a decision, again, that was made back in 2023 as part of that PUD amendment. The ordinance does not regulate the number of stories, and that's one of the issues that's been raised by the residents. So I'll touch on some of those. First is that story issue. So when the preliminary rezoning was established in 2022, the resolution did call for a 5-story and 72-foot tall building for Phase 2. At final approval, however, the resolution stated that it would be 6 stories and 72 feet. The overall height didn't change. Part of the 5 stories versus 6 stories can still be accommodated within the 72-foot height limitation, given the use that's proposed, the residential use. The office adjacent to it, the ceilings for medical use can be higher. But
just hold there. Member Risser has a question for you, I think, while you're talking about that issue.
It's concerning to me that Resolution 2022-81 and Resolution 2023-11 are not identical. And I don't understand how we can have language that says it will be limited to 5 stories, and that came out of an extensive dialogue that happened. And I listened to all of the meetings, the meeting in September, the early meeting in October, the meeting in mid-October. I was not on city council then, but it was very clear that the ask was for 72 feet and 5 stories. on Better Together, the description said 5 stories, 72 feet. I reached out to the Sun Current to find out what the ad was for the public hearing, so I could see the language that was published, presumably at the beginning of September. And one of the things that I really find amazing is that so few people came forward. They commented on Better Together, but this is a very organized neighborhood, and I can't help but wonder if seeing 5 stories was something that they felt to be comforting. And so I'm wondering, how is it, first off, specific question, how is it that council can pass a resolution after extensive discussion, and then when the resolution comes back months later and it's placed on the consent agenda, it changes so that the stipulation, number 20, goes from 5 stories to 6? How can that happen?
It's not uncommon for projects to change slightly from preliminary to final.
But what
The
about
ordinance
resolution?
itself,
I'm talking about a resolution, I'm not talking about a project. This is a formal resolution that was voted on.
right, there was a preliminary approval. And when it comes back for final, there oftentimes are changes from the preliminary plan. This was one of them.
But nobody was notified of that. There was no notification to elected officials. There, was, and when this was pitched to the public, it was always 5 stories. So if we do, presumably, in the future, we should look at public hearing definitions with a grain of salt and go, oh yeah, that's what is being asked for, and even if they pass a resolution, it could change. Is that the way things, maybe we can talk to our attorney, is that standard protocol?
So a resolution is a written form of a motion. It's not like an ordinance that requires specific edits to it. My understanding is that it was a preliminary resolution initially, and then through conversations with the developer, it became final and was on the public agenda. But from the legal perspective, we have no concerns with what's being presented tonight from staff's perspective.
Okay, so just to be clear, after dialogue, after public hearing, it passes with this language. And then when it gets on the consent agenda, it's not even highlighted as a change on the consent agenda. So we, as elected officials, need to go line by line through every single document to make sure that there aren't any changes that have happened, because they're not called to our attention.
When was the 72-foot height limitation adopted? That might be helpful or instructive.
Yeah, it was part of the preliminary approval. 72 was the max at preliminary and at final.
That was on October 18 of 2022?
Correct, as well as the
5
first
stories
reading
or
of the ordinance.
72 feet.
Correct.
Then it went to, in finals, 6 stories, 72 feet.
Correct. But the ordinance didn't spell out specifically the number of stories, just the maximum height.
It was in the resolution, but not in the ordinance.
Correct.
5 and 72, and then its
Correct.
final resolution was 6 and 72, but the ordinance was 72?
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. That cause anything further, members?
The ordinance that I looked at, published by the city of Edina 3 days ago, still reflected the project that had the townhomes, so it was never updated.
Yes, the ordinance currently, if you notice the numbering within the PUDs are out of sequence. We've got an issue with the codifier. We'll work to straighten that out within the zoning code that's posted on the website.
But am I interpreting what you're saying correctly, that in the context of making final approval, there was also an ordinance approved?
That's correct.
That deals with a 72-foot issue, and was that February 7 of 2023?
2023, that is correct, yes.
Yeah, but that you granted, or we granted, final approval of zoning ordinance amendment?
That's correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Other questions that came up have been in regard to just the process. So the applicant has followed the PUD process. It is a long process. We're 2 years in, so following specifically can be confusing. The city has held 4 public hearings, 2 for the initial PUD changes to the site back in 2022 and then the 2 public hearings that have been held here for this Phase 2 site plan review. They've also done a number of neighborhood meetings with the neighborhood and a couple of sketch plans. You recall that after the 2023 approval, the applicant did come in with a sketch plan to consider a hotel on the site. They decided not to pursue that use. Another issue that came up is in regard to direct entry on France Avenue and 72nd Street. The intent there is, when speaking about direct entry, it's in regard to the pedestrian access to the front of the building. That's an issue that we've often talked about with development along France. It was not intended to be a vehicular access to the front of the building, especially on France Avenue, where Hennepin County really does not want to see a vehicular access. In 2023, we got an email from the then transportation planner at that time stating that county staff are strongly supported of all site accesses directed onto Gallagher and 72nd. We believe removal of the direct access to France Avenue will significantly benefit traffic operations, pedestrian comfort, and overall safety. We staff verified with current staff, county staff, and they provided an email essentially stating the same thing, that access should be provided from side streets to benefit traffic operations, pedestrian comfort, and overall safety along France Avenue. Connecting the new development to Gallagher Drive will allow access to traffic signals on France Avenue, and connecting it to 72nd Street will also provide additional transportation options in and out. Another issue that's been raised is in regard...
Hold on a minute. Member Risser may have a question on that particular matter.
I have read, not a ton of resolutions, but your interpretation that it's not referring to vehicular access, that it's referring to the design of the building, makes me wonder if you can point me in the direction of any other resolution where it gets that granular. Because what is stated in the verbiage, we don't talk about building design. We talk about the site. And so that interpretation, and we did also have a resident who submitted a letter that included a diagram that showed that the previous, and in fact, this would be the ordinance that is reflected today in our code, had a plan that had vehicular access from France, and that was for the grocery store concept. So it's hard for me to see the merit of the argument that this is about doors on a building and not about a road accessing the site. Can you help me out there a little bit or point me to another resolution where that was the case?
I don't have another resolution in front of me, just generally speaking, that has been a condition that we've put on projects along France where we want access from the public sidewalk into the front buildings.
Member Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So when I was going through documents, there are a lot of documents to go through, but one of them in September, in the ordinance or the resolution that we passed, said, according to the plans submitted to the city, is what would be in the ordinance eventually. And in the plans submitted to the city on September 20th, 2022, there is a site access map. And I believe this is what we depended upon when we wrote the ordinance. And the site access map shows access coming in through 72nd and through Gallagher, and there's no vehicular access off of France. So I think, this was in the public hearing. This was before the public at the time of the initial approval. And the way I read the document was that the details are in the submission from the developer, and the submission from the developer showed that vehicular access would come through these side streets, and that there's no reference to vehicular access on France to this development.
That is correct. Thank you for pointing that out. What I believe Councilmember Risser is referring to is the 2019 approvals for a PUD on the site that never happened. There was to be a direct access off of France Avenue. The county wasn't real excited about it. They first said, no, we're not going to permit that access. But they later did agree to that access. So that was part of the original 2019 PUD that was amended with the 2023 PUD.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Councilmember Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Teague, I appreciate you going through this, the content here. But it does, I don't know what the right word is. I don't know how we can go forward and approve a resolution with this amount of lack of clarity on what should or should be in the resolution. And what we're doing now is we're going to start a process where we're trying to clarify this as we go forward in order to do a vote. And so I asked questions earlier, like what dictates in a process where we start over, where we say, all right, there's been too many changes, so to make sure that we get this right, we need to go back to the beginning and start that process over. And I asked that question in earnest because it's not, I don't think it's fair necessarily to a developer to do that. But in all honesty, that's kind of where I am, because there's so many things that have changed. And I know we have a criteria that says if the changes are minor, then we have the ability as a council to just take those changes, accept those, and then move forward. But so much has changed here. Right? We've also changed function, right? There was a hotel, now it's an apartment complex. I get we're saying it's 72 feet, it's the same height, but it's 6 stories and not 5. So we can do a table that shows that, which is typically what we do. But am I the only one that feels uncomfortable with that level of lack of clarity with this?
Member Risser feels.
I share your feelings of being uncomfortable, and I'm looking at the Better Together page and the description. It says this project would be developed in 2 phases. The first phase would be the construction of a 5-story, 124,620 square foot office building and coffee shop with underground parking. Then it goes on. Phase 2 has received final approval. Phase 1 has received final approval. Phase 2 would include a similar sized building in height and square footage. And so, yeah, okay, it doesn't say the number of stories, but, to the person, the average person, and, we have our whole building height overlay map. We talked about that. You look at that, you look at the key or the legend, and it's 12 feet for every story. And so, people see 5 feet. This one here, the office, it's 72 instead of 60. But, you have to read so carefully and so critically, and you have to constantly say, what does this really mean? And maybe this means something that I'm not thinking about. Maybe it's not going to be a 5-story building. Maybe it's going to be a 6-story. Maybe it's going to be a 7-story building. Who knows? And it just, I feel like that is so opaque, and residents need to not have to be looking at things and wondering, what does this mean? And sometimes I feel like I'm up here asking questions and I need to figure out the magic way to ask the question in order to get a straight answer. And that is really, really hard. And I feel like when I've been communicating with residents, they share that sense of frustration. So yeah, I think we are on the same page.
Member Jackson?
Yes, thank you. So I went back through the documents again today after our meeting yesterday, and what we were told in the fall of 2022 is that there would be most likely a residential building with 150 units and some retail. This is proposed 153 units and no retail. And the retail was dropped because of the parking requirements and the traffic concerns. So 150 units plus retail versus 153 units, I don't find to be radically different. 72 feet versus 72 feet. You know, we're talking about 3 more apartments than what was initially proposed to us in 2022. This is difficult to have to do it in phases. I understand that. But unless we ban phased development, this is the way it's going to work. The site plan was laid out, and there was a box, and then it said it's most likely going to be apartments with some retail. It's going to be mixed use, and then the retail was dropped out. And I don't find that to be radically different from what was proposed to me.
Yeah, Member Pierce, any add-on thoughts?
No.
Okay, yeah, well, I'm sure you'll have more, so as we go through with Director Teague. So just by way of background again, we had a resolution that had been approved, but there's an existing PUD there, right? And the existing PUD would allow 2 6-story buildings with 299 units of housing and 30,000 square feet of retail and 10 owner-occupied townhouses.
That was the 2019 PUD that was never developed. The current
My point was it was approved but never developed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the current PUD. That was an approved PUD.
That was an approved PUD that was amended in 2023 for the current project proposed by Mr. Carlson. And that includes the 76-foot tall office building, phase 1, and then phase 2 was to be, as Councilmember Jackson pointed out, 150 units of housing with 10,000 square feet of retail.
Okay. All right, go ahead and keep going. I think we'll probably have many more questions here.
Yeah, the next is in regard to the traffic study. Mr. Ed Terhar, who prepared the traffic study, is with us this evening. If you have any specifics in that regard, he's here to answer as well. But the study did conclude that no roadway improvements are needed with this project. That included the no left turn onto 72nd. However, if the council believes that is an important issue, the city engineer had informed me that a sanitary sewer project is required in this area that's going to require a full street reconstruction there at 72nd. So at that time, the city could put in, I don't know exactly the shape, it would have to be studied, something that would prevent that no left onto 72nd. Another question that came up was in regard to I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Because my comment will probably cover both of these.
Okay. In regard to parking, and so there are parking requirements established as part of this PUD. It's really based on the parking study, again, that was done by Stantec. It concluded that 468 parking stalls are required. This project would provide 470 structured parking stalls with 13 on the surface. So both phases can be accommodated. This phase 2 underneath the apartments is going to provide some parking for the office building to the south, so there would be cross-access easements. but the parking is satisfied per code. Another issue that came up is
460 required, and how many provided between the two buildings?
468 are required, and between the two buildings, there are 470 structured stalls and 13 surface. So it's just over what's required in the PUD.
Okay. All right, thanks.
So my question then on traffic and parking is that sometimes I think we're asking the wrong question. So if we're going to go through and do the analysis based on the criteria, and the analysis says we don't need to make any changes, sometimes I think that's the wrong question. And so what I would love to have us do is to ask the question, if we want to reduce cut-through traffic, if we want to minimize overflow parking, then run an AI model and give us the three, and I'm making up the number 3, but give us the options in order to achieve that for traffic patterns. And then we could have that information to be able to make a decision on what kind of requirements we want to make on traffic. And so I don't think that's the way we do it today.
Correct.
But that would be my ask.
Correct. We do have the traffic consultant do the study for us. There is a model of the Southdale district, and they incorporate projects that have been approved around the district. They also build in just a multiplier of just base improvements in the area. I believe it's like 10% added growth over time. So those numbers are plugged in, and then they come to their conclusions. There may very well be this AI type model. And the folks I've spoke to, they're not aware of it, but it certainly could be out there. It's possible that a lot of the inputs that would be put into the AI model are similar to what the traffic consultants rely on. So they may or may not come out with the same results.
Member Jackson.
Yes, so I want to talk about a little bit of policy that people have talked about in the commissions. So our planning commission spent 2 years working on a revised traffic ordinance and requirements. And that's what we give to Stantec is the policy that we worked on with the Planning Commission. And so the parking is reflected through that process, the required parking. And one of the questions was, how many people, this one parking place per apartment. That was a policy decision that we worked on with the Planning Commission. And I know that Member Agnew, were she here, would tell us that, and I'm quoting from memory from her, but that surprisingly, a surprising number of people who live in apartments choose not to have any car at all. And that actually the parking that's allowed is often overparked for that purpose. So I just want to throw that out there. But similarly, the Transportation Commission spent time looking at exactly the question that you asked, Member Pierce, and they weren't able to complete that work. So it's something we might ask them to do again. So what kind of things can we, as a city, model and do when we're having to make decisions about traffic flow? So that's something that we can ask for help with. And that, like I said, that was started and not completed. And I would really, I think it'd be useful as we do this because these are complex and we are concerned about cut-through traffic. But those are both policy things that we can turn to our resident experts to look into for us. Doesn't solve anything tonight, but I think those are really good questions, and I wanted to make a plug for our commissions. And I do have a question about the traffic flow. One of the things, and this might be for Mr. Terhard, that the neighbors pointed out last night is that by creating this new interior street, that it will actually increase cut-through traffic, not only from the new buildings, but also from the Cedars of Edina, who could use that as a way to bypass France, cut through on 72nd Street up to 70th, past the school or past another route. And so that actually by creating this new interior street, we would put additional traffic through the Cornelia neighborhood there. And I wondered if they looked at that, and if so, are there ways that we can encourage both the new buildings and also the Cedars of Edina to continue to go out to France rather than cut through towards Highway 100 on 70th Street?
Yeah, I would ask Mr. Terhar to address those. You know, the one way to prevent it is to make those roadway improvements when 72nd is improved.
So I would, I'm sorry, I would just say that's the exact same thing I just said. And so it is so frustrating that we take a box and we try to make decisions based on set criteria. What I'm suggesting is that we take that as a scenario, we run the AI model to give us what are the scenarios, what are the traffic flows, what are the patterns, how do we mitigate those types of issues. And we get up here and we have these conversations, and I can promise you we're gonna spend the next hour and a half talking about this, and if we vote on it, we're gonna have this much more clarity than we had when we started. And I have to ask the question, am I okay with that? And I'm not. And everybody's different. And so I'm happy to have the conversation, but there's nothing that you're gonna say that's gonna convince me that we've run AI models based on the constraints that we wanna have in this project for traffic flow. And the reason I can say that with specificity is because nobody's asked us. Nobody has asked us, what constraints do we want to see? Nobody has asked the neighbors, what constraints do they want to see? They certainly don't feel like they're being heard, which is why we got the email. So we can keep running people up here to do presentations, but we aren't going to have answers to these questions. And it's unfair to be at this point to have that lack of clarity, in my opinion. And so let's keep going. But I just want to be clear, what I said that you disagreed with and pushed off on the commissions is exactly what you turned around and asked. It's the exact same thing. How do you reduce cut-through traffic? Let's have the presentation to say, here's how we do it. And we aren't any more informed, in my opinion, than we were when we started.
I actually agree with you very much that we need an AI model and constraints, but we don't have that tonight. And I'm just saying this is a tool for creating something like that. And I was given a specific question last night, and I want a specific answer to that doesn't necessarily impact how I'm going to vote tonight. But if there is an answer, I'd like to hear it. And in the future, when we're looking at these are just, this site in particular is breathtakingly complex, and it has been for over 10 years, I think. So yes, I would love to see an AI model where we can run and say what's going to happen and how's the traffic going to flow. But right now, I had a specific question asked, and my friend asked me to ask about it, and so I'm going to give him a voice and say, will this interior street increase cut-through traffic in the neighborhood?
Good question. Yeah, introduce yourself, please, and give us your address.
Dick, we're at 1 Carlson Parkway, Plymouth, Minnesota. It's a very good question. It's a very difficult question to answer. I don't even know if running an AI model would give us that answer, because it has to do with what people perceive as the shortest route. Now, as part of our study, we do look at using, for example, Google Maps, picking a point on the map and saying, I want to go to the north on Highway 100. what is the quickest way to get there? For uses on Gallagher to the south, to get to the north on Highway 100, it's actually quicker to go south to 77th and get on 100 at that interchange because it's all right turns. If you go to 72nd and go north, you have to make a left turn onto 70th. 70th is a 25-mile-an-hour street. And so with all those factors taken into account, as you get farther south on Gallagher, including the apartments, it actually is physically quicker to go the other way. So we do look at that. We take that into account. Really, the traffic that would be using 72nd, there would be some from this development. And my best estimate on that is based on the study we did back in 2018 for the original project. We did collect data when the previous office building was fully occupied and the medical office building, which actually had a connection through the parking ramp, if you remember on the bottom, was a connection to the parking ramp. Into that parking, you could get to 72nd. Anyways, we documented there was about 15% of that development traffic use 72nd. So based on that information, that's my best estimate as to what would be using 72nd from this development. I don't see any other large amounts of cut-through traffic using that street.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we've got you here. This may be helpful too, just from a backgrounding standpoint. So when you did that study, was it 2018?
Yeah, 2018, yeah.
So what kind of volumes were being generated in the morning and afternoon out of 7250?
In 2018?
Yeah.
That was a larger project, so the numbers were higher. I
mean the buildings that were functioning there. I mean the businesses that were functioning there. What kind of traffic were those existing businesses generating?
Sure. Actually, Carrie asked me that question, and not surprisingly, but they're actually very similar to what's being proposed today. So the total numbers were actually quite similar. So, for example, in the previous, with the previous uses, there was the office building and then the medical office building.
Right.
The previous uses in the PM peak hour generated 298, and the daily was 2773.
Well, hold on, I want to write these down.
Sure.
This is for 7250 now?
This is for both of them combined. Do you want just 7250? Well, I have both of them combined, 7200 and 7250, the previous uses.
And that was what?
So let me just run through the total. The AM in the previous was 246. The PM previous was 298. And the previous daily was 2773.
2773?
Yeah, that was the daily total, 2,773.
What year was that?
That was 2018.
Okay.
And do you want the current numbers for the current proposal, the total, or
I think
you have that? Okay.
Well, I can get them to you to verify them, but in visiting with the neighbors last night, and of course, this traffic is a big issue that everybody's thinking about.
Sure.
300 cars a day, 7,200 and 200 cars at 7,250 is what one of the.
Well,
what do your numbers show?
That's not correct. The current plan that's being proposed generates, according to the study or the most recent memo that we put together, and the AM generates 349. The PM.
This is the combined 7,200,
yes,
7,250.
combined, yes.
Just like the before.
Combined, yes. Yeah, they're combined.
349
349 in the AM, 275 in the PM, and 2683 daily. So the PM and the daily are actually lower than the previous. The AM is higher primarily because of the coffee use.
All right, and then do you have the data from the, I think it's PUD 16, because this is an amendment, a proposed amendment to PUD 16. So when the project was approved, that would have put 2 6-story buildings with 299 units of housing and 30,000 square feet of retail there, and 10 owner-occupied townhomes. Do you have that traffic data?
I don't believe I do. The study we did in 2022 was not those uses. And
Was not those uses?
no, it was, in 2022, we had 100, this is the one with 150 apartment units and 10,000 square feet in 7,200.
Yeah.
And then it was the 124,620 square feet of general office and a 2,200 square foot coffee shop. That was the 2022 study. That's very similar.
That's the current project.
No, it does not have the retail anymore. The retail's gone.
Okay. All right, thank you for that.
And you have 153 apartments instead of 150.
Don't we have that data from the prior PUD or the existing
I can
PUD?
tell you what the 2018 study had that we assumed.
Isn't that the data you just gave us?
It was, but I didn't give you the uses.
Well,
that had some sit-down restaurant, that had townhouses, had 10 townhouses. It had 2 sit-down restaurants, had general retail. So I don't know if that aligns with the other PUD you're talking about.
oh, so when I asked you what the numbers were for the ongoing businesses on 7,200 and 7,250, are you going to give me the same numbers you gave me? Are you going to give me the same numbers now that you gave me when I asked you that question, and now it's really what that project was?
No, what I gave you before were the uses that were there that were torn down.
Okay, good.
Those were that's the numbers that I first gave you.
Okay.
The uses that were torn down. The second numbers I gave you were the ones that are currently proposed.
Right.
Current numbers.
All right. And
2018 numbers were a different proposal.
Yeah,
and I don't
okay.
know where that went, but that's what we studied.
Okay.
That's a lot of numbers, I know.
Yeah, let's hear that. Let's hear that now.
So, do you want me to tell you what
Yeah, because I think it's what we're talking about here is the 10 townhouses, 30,000 square feet of retail, and 299 units of apartments?
It's very close to that, yes. Yes. Do you want me to read what we, well,
Yeah.
it's very close to that, but I can tell you what we studied.
Okay.
So, I'll just read it off by building. 7,200 building was 164 apartments, 10 townhouses, 4,000 square feet of sit-down restaurant, and 9,000 square feet of general retail. And then the 7,250 building was 135 apartments, 4,000 square foot sit-down restaurant, and 13,000 square feet of general retail. So it's very close to your numbers that you were citing. It's not exactly the same.
Okay.
And then as far as the trips go, and I have to read them by building.
Okay.
Let's see here, the 7,250 building had 111 AM and 150 PM and 1,736 daily. And then the 7,250 building had 101 AM, 148 PM, and 1,674 daily. So, and I don't have those totals for both of them, but those are the individual buildings.
Okay, that was just one building or both buildings?
That was both buildings.
Okay, okay. All right, okay, so I think it's back to Kerry.
Can I just ask
Yeah.
a clarifying question?
Sure.
So the neighbors, and I'm assuming we probably all have talked to the same neighbors, but maybe a bigger group, since we didn't do it together. So if one of the concerns is cut-through traffic, then what we, the city, what we're saying is that there's minimal cut-through traffic. There will be minimal cut-through traffic through Cornelia based on these numbers.
Well, minimal 15% of the
15%,
traffic.
yeah.
So do you
But-
consider that minimal?
But acceptable. I'm asking you, right?
I'm just
So-
giving you the numbers.
He doesn't make any
Acceptable is a tough question to answer. It's an opinion.
Okay, then who has the then who, based on the data, has the opinion? So you've given us the data. That's great. Thank you. So who says whether or not that's acceptable? No, that hasn't been us in the past. There's been a report that would suggest whether or not there is, if we need to make changes based on that data, and then we make the decision based on that report. So I'm just asking for the clarification based on the numbers.
If I may, as engineering staff, based on the analysis and the traffic study, we look at the characteristics of the road itself to determine whether or not it can accommodate that additional traffic. Whether or not that's acceptable or not, again, is, I guess, a matter of perspective. Does that answer the question?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Sure. So based on the traffic volumes that are forecasted in the study, as engineering staff, we look at the characteristics of the roadway to determine whether or not it can accommodate that traffic. Whether it's acceptable or not, I guess, is a matter of opinion.
Member Risser.
A suggestion that was made by more than one of the residents who I met with was that it would make sense to not have the road that is added and runs through the property actually go all the way to 72nd, to make it a drive that ends and you can't actually drive all the way through. And the point was made that although putting it in is something that will help us if we can get roads through properties to the north, those roads don't really exist. And the more I think about this idea of not actually having it go all the way to 72nd, the more I think maybe that's something the developer might actually like, because then they don't have cut-through traffic cruising through their property. So anyway, I just want to put that out there.
So, Member Risser, just want to make sure I understand it. But when I looked at, we talked to the neighbors about this last night, and one of the ideas was that you just close that road off at both ends. But of course, the building has to have access to the parking ramp off 72nd. So what you're suggesting is somewhere north or somewhere south of the parking ramp, possibly this road ends or it stops there, and there's no way to go from Gallagher
all the way through, right?
So
exactly.
that people using Gallagher have to go to France.
I think, yes, exactly. And they would come off of Gallagher because there's a light there.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that thought. And then, Mr. Tahar, while you're here, we don't need a traffic engineer to tell us that's a deterrent to cut through traffic.
That would be a deterrent to cut through traffic, yes.
What do you think then about this issue that came up? And I think the developer said at the last meeting they were comfortable with the notion that if there was no left turn allowed out of the stub street, if we'll call it that now, the internal street, left turn onto 72nd, what kind of deterrent effect do you think that would have with respect to so-called cut-through traffic going westbound on 72nd if there was no left turn allowed?
Sure, it would if it was properly designed and physically limited people from doing that, it would be effective, in my opinion. So, but that's the question: how to properly design that. It would need to be some more discussion with Chad and figure out what could happen there. So.
You're saying something more than signage, so.
Yeah, you can put up a sign, but that's probably not going to be.
The point Director Teague was making, if we were going to redo that street.
Sure. There would be options to look at, yes.
That's the way to do it.
Yep. that would be the way to do it.
I think that's the way that prior PUD 16 was designed, wasn't it?
That is correct. The developer at that time was proposing to reconstruct all that portion of 72nd.
Do you want to continue with your presentation?
I was really just ready to conclude that the staff and the Planning Commission recommendation was unanimous for approval of the site plan and the ordinance amendment, and then turn it back to the council for discussion.
Okay, yes, yeah, well, it's ready for some more questions, I'm sure. I had one for you for parking. People were talking about parking. So when we met with the neighbors last night, they were operating under the assumption that the, I gotta find that now, the traffic numbers or the parking numbers were higher than what you mentioned. And I thought that I recalled that right now we're over-parked, which you recommend, which you set forth, that data on the parking, right? There's 470 structured, 460 required. But the neighbors were assuming those numbers were different than that. Do you know where those numbers came from that they would have had? Yeah, I just had it here, and no, I don't have it here. I couldn't find it.
The number I have in my notes, Mr. Mayor, is 583 parking spaces.
Was that with a prior plan with the retail?
That might have been. I don't have that number in front of me.
Okay.
With the elimination of the 10,000 square feet, that does reduce the amount of parking that's required.
Yeah. I know one of the questions they had was how do we get to 6 stories? We've talked about that. Talked about that door issue. We talked about 70 traffic issues. We talked about the curb cut on France for an auto entrance, the county's reticence there, which is interesting because before they said they'd reluctantly do it, and then apparently they changed their mind for this project. Member Jackson has some other questions she's got written down, I think, that they had last night that she wants to ask about.
Well, I want to go back to the parking. I found in the extensive memo we got, 483 parking spaces do not comply with Edina City Code, which requires 573 parking stalls, is the numbers that the neighbors provided with us. And so I think that was your question, Mr. Mayor, about the numbers.
But you're saying the numbers are 470 structured, 460 required, 13 surface spots?
So that's based on the PUD requirement. And again, that was based on the parking study that was done by Stantec.
Yep.
And their conclusion was there is adequate parking. So it is a variation from city code, but the conclusion from the consultant was that it would be, there would be enough parking. So that was what was put into the ordinance.
Okay.
So while you think about that, I want to follow up with that question. So if this was a zoning by right, they would require 573 parking spaces. But because of the PUD, the number of parking spaces changes based on the traffic study that was done.
Correct.
Okay.
We had a couple of questions last night that I think are more developer appropriate. And I'm going to ask Mr. Carlson to come up, and he may have some other thoughts here as he listens to the conversation. May not even, yeah, I'll go ahead.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this project. You know, my name is Ted Carlson with Orion Investments, and here with our team is Bob Loken, and hi to my family at home. You know, I think I sense some frustration in the room, and I think that is a reflection of what happens when we as a development team are trying to bring in excess of 150 million in developed projects to our town, of which I live in. And I'll say for the umpteenth time, you know, we live here, our kids are in public school here, and we're proud of the projects that we built and owned and developed in our community, and we've done what we said we were going to do. And I think it's a reminder that a year ago, we demolished these buildings because they were a blight and they were ugly. And we've secured the site and tried to keep it as clean and orderly as we can. So for me, I think it's, you know, to hear that maybe we haven't been engaged or that the process and there's questions around that is difficult, because we've had 2 sketch plans, multiple public hearings, and multiple trips through. And with the Planning Commission, we had a 9-0 unanimous vote in favor of this plan. What I'd like to just ask a few questions of maybe Mr. Tierhar to see if he can answer these, because when we develop projects, we do it with the neighborhood in mind, we do it with the city in mind, we do it with the engineers in mind, we do it with the watershed in mind, we do it with the county in mind, we do it with debt, equity, tenants, and sustainability. And so aligning all those things is quite challenging, especially when we've got a lot of smart and present voices throughout our community. So when we came through with the sketch plan, I received emails from several neighbors, very anti-hotel. And furthermore, as we thought about the best project for the neighborhood, under our approved PUD that included 10,000 feet of retail, we elected to pull that retail out. And we've got a project here that is fully aligned with what I believe to be the best example of the GDGs in the Southdale neighborhood, where we're building high-quality Class AA office that'll bring high-paying jobs to our community. We're building housing that's in desperate need and is mandated by the Met Council to bring to our community that will provide affordable units and places for our residents to live. We're creating connectivity through the site with a north-south connector, bike trails, pedestrian trails. We spent a lot of time, hours, and hundreds of thousands of dollars designing this project to fit those guidelines. All of the parking in this project on 7200 is enclosed within the building. 0 surface stalls. We're in an alliance with the affordable policy. We're in alliance plus with the sustainable policy. We've got a way to accommodate a future connection, whether that's a bridge or an underpass. I believe, and I would defer to the city attorney if we would, to get her opinion on our alignment with the PUD. We're trying to activate the site. And specifically, I would like to ask Mr. Terhar, if he could, between what our PUD was approved by pulling out the retail component, 10,000 square feet, my public school math is that that takes traffic down by 44%. So I think, you know, it's a difficult process. And spending, again, close to $150 million to build these projects, of which, by the way, I'll sign personal guarantees on, is pretty impressive for our community. So if we don't have the support here tonight, I'd like to hear exactly why and how we can provide maybe a better project. Lastly, as we listen to the park presentation before us, we are dedicating almost an acre, a quarter of land to a stormwater treatment facility that's a buffer. And from sight line, from western boundary to our building is 221 feet, in excess of 70 yards. When you go from the back of the nearest home to our building, it's 290 yards. The panhandle on the park I just measured is approximately 270 feet of city-owned property. So I want to provide some perspective that as we get, you know, what are we going to do with this project, that we're trying to really thread the needle and build something great for our community and take a site that's looked like crap for 10 years and make it really, really something nice that we can all be proud of. And we've done that with other sites in our community. So with that, I would just ask Mr. Terhar if you can verify my public school math. Thank you. So with that, I'd like to just understand if you have any further questions or concerns on this project.
So what about the questions for Mr. Terhar?
It was if by pulling from our approved PUD in 2023, we removed 10,000 square feet of retail, specifically within 7,200. And the removal of that retail traffic was a 44% reduction in traffic. Is that fair?
Yeah, it actually ends up being 43.3%.
I'm
if
sorry.
you want to get technical, but yeah, you're very close.
The joy of engineers. Thank you. Lastly, I wanted to just summarize what I believe you presented to Mayor Hovland as it related to traffic. Is our traffic as proposed less than what we came through with in 2023?
Yes. It's less
Is our
than the
traffic
2020.
as proposed less than the previous PUD that was approved?
I'd have to add those up, but I believe it was lower.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was my deduction from the data that he gave us, is that it was lower. So I had a couple of questions from last night that I think they kind of came up as the conversation went along and people have ideas. One was the general sort of observation from the neighbors we met with that, gee, we could get comfortable with a 4-story building on France on the project. So the question was that I wrote down was, what would be the cost of going to the 4 stories on France, or is that even feasible? I guess is a better way to put it, to go to a 4-story project on France Avenue that would be lower in height than what's proposed.
I think then we get much closer to the neighborhood to the west, and we'd probably look to push to do more units.
Let me turn to Director Teague. So if we've got a 6-story building that we've kind of stacked towards France Avenue. Then we've got I'll call it the Werner for the walkway and the sidewalk and the stormwater management pond. What is the flexibility in terms of setback if they went to the west with a lower building? You know? Maybe think about that or look it up while you're... And I'll go back and ask another question. Another question that came up was, could the TIF from 7250 be used to fund a park at 7200? So the underlying question there, of course, is if that were even possible, theoretically, what would it cost? You know, you've got fixed costs in there, and you've got costs of development, and it strikes me that it would be a pretty significant number to be thinking about for a neighborhood park.
Yeah, I think that, we would, based upon our site costs, pursuit costs, holding costs, and reasonable value of the land, that would be north of $12 million.
Okay. Thanks for that.
90 feet is the setback on the west side, the required setback.
Required setback. So how much additional, how much further west could they move if there was?
Yeah, a little over 100 feet closer.
That would be if we modified the requirements that we've put on the project because it's a PUD.
Right, now that would impact the north-south road, so it's really an amendment to the entire overall development plan.
It kind of moves the whole project right up to the pond, essentially.
Does.
So you get, instead of narrower, thinner, you get wider, lower, wider.
It's also step back on the west side where it's 5 stories with a step back in the patio where the 6th story is stepped on the west side.
Jackson?
Yes. One of the other questions that we got was the idea, talk us through once again how the different parking structures would interact. So is it flow over from the commercial building into the residential or vice versa? Or talk to me a little bit about how the cars would be parked because don't match exactly building to building.
Yeah, great question. I think it's in full alignment with the design experience guidelines and sustainability and thoughtful futuristic development, frankly. That's one of the great things that mixed use brings, is that apartments are busy when the office is not, usually, and vice versa. And for example, offices are not busy on weekends. So what we've got is control of both properties. We have to structure easements with the city before we can pull a permit that's required as part of our resolution that allows us to make sure that we have plenty of parking between the 2 sites for each use. So there's 2 ways to get to and from the parking. One is at grade on the street, both on the west side, what we're calling the cut-through street, what I used to call a modern Woonorf, 2 is at grade, either with the connection between the public plaza, the amenities on the office building, and the amenities in the apartment building. So there's 2 different ways to easily connect for parkers between either project.
And if an Uber is coming to drop off or a DoorDash, that's easily accessible or visible to the public. So if a DoorDash comes to deliver dinner, they'll be able to find the building.
Yes, we own and operate the Lorient. At Sunnyside Francis is a very similar parking situation.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions that you thought of from that meeting last night? I'm trying to think of through my notes too. I mean, one of the issues involved that potential underpass, but. Member Risser, go ahead. Oh, I had it. Go ahead.
Okay, I do want to clarify, my frustration is by process and how that has gone, and I'm not putting that on you.
Thank you.
I also want to ask, another part of the frustration that I hear from the neighbors is they've seen projects nearby that you look at the picture, how they're supposed to appear, and then what actually gets built is very different than what people imagine. And that happened with the 4040 building. It was supposed to sit on the ground, and it doesn't. It was elevated up. It was supposed to have a setback on the highest floor all the way back, and then it kind of came forward. And so it wasn't done the way people thought it was going to be done in the picture. And we learned that the changes were approved and that they didn't come before council because they were considered minor. And so one person's idea of a minor change is another person's idea of a major change. And I want to know that your vision, it's going to sit on the ground the way you show it. It's going to be scaled back on the upper level the way you show it. And I'm sorry I have to ask that question.
No, that's okay. That's our full intent, yes. And I think if you look at the projects that we own, operate, and have developed within the city, I think that that's a good representation of how we choose to do business.
I had some supplemental questions here. One for you was, how many meetings did you have with the neighbors? That didn't get covered, I didn't think, very thoroughly.
4.
Okay. And with respect to the county, did you ever talk to them about a potential curb cut on France?
I did not directly work with the county. We rely on engineering and staff to do that. But compared to the previous PUD, we have removed any access on France, including the current cutout on France, which I believe is aligned with the county wishes. Is that fair, Director Teague?
That's right. And then one of the questions that the neighbors had last night was employee parking. How does the amount of parking that you have accommodate the employees as well?
Yes.
And then another question about the parking. We talked about the fact that it's all enclosed, I think.
Yes.
So part of the parking is similar to what you have over at the Lorient. If I remember, you go in at grade or street level, and there's parking in there that's concealed from the street. It's built into the building, so it doesn't look like a one-story parking ramp or a grade level parking ramp. Is that correct?
Yes, you're correct. And I think to Councilmember Risser's question, it provides a very nice look. It's very clean. It's not cluttered. And our resident and office access points are controlled, safe, and secure.
And how many spots do you have at grade inside?
Inside the building at grade is plus or minus 65.
Yeah, okay. And then in the 2 buildings underground, you've got Remember those numbers?
We've got over 400.
Just going to go through my notes one more time from last night. Oh, this is a question that came up too when Member Jackson and I were meeting, was because of the traffic being a concern in that whole broad neighborhood, remind me of the status of the traffic study. Maybe this is a question for Mr. Scipione. What's the status of the traffic study in the entire Cornelia neighborhood? And the scope of that study?
Mr. Mayor, I believe we reported back on that study a couple meetings ago. I don't have my notes here, but Director Milner, I believe, previously mentioned that a study from a number of years ago recommended 13 or 14 different actions to take place in the neighborhood, and the majority of those have been implemented. The only one that has not been implemented is to increase capacity of Highway 62, which we don't have the ability to do.
Yeah, I remember all that report from Director Milner, and the only one he didn't have the ability to do is one you just mentioned, is increase lane capacity on crosstown. So, but I think I wanted to ask you more about, signage or calming things that we could do in the broader neighborhood that would be in addition to the things that we already done.
Yeah.
But I'm going to turn to Member Jackson first.
Right. So, but I was under the impression that we had a new study that was sort of not a watershed study, but a traffic shed study for the entire 62 to 694. Am I incorrect that we were looking at that? Because that's my recollection, that there was the study that was done previously and we got that report, but I was under the impression that we were doing a much larger one, sort of gathering all the data that we've gathered. Am I wrong in that?
I don't recall that. You mean from 62 to 494?
Yeah.
In the Southdale district itself.
Yeah. That was my understanding.
My recollection is that, I don't remember if it was last year or 2 years ago, but we received a petition from residents in the Cornelia neighborhood asking for a number of traffic improvements. We looked into that and we reported back to council on what improvements we had made, what we're in the process of looking into. But I don't recall a further study that we're working on beyond that.
That's a Chad Milner question, because it was a comment that he made that prompts the memory, but it was not we have not seen a presentation on that. I just don't know if that's, so I think what the mayor was going to ask, and I'll go ahead and ask, is what can we do right now as a city with this development? Can we prevent the left turn at this point without completely reconstructing the street? Is that feasible on a temporary basis? And if not, when is the street reconstruction scheduled?
So you could, at that, if you keep this internal street connecting to 72nd Street, you could install a median or a pork chop in such a way to only permit vehicles to turn right and to exit off France. It's not to say that some vehicles may not circumvent that and kind of do a U-turn around. Another thing, kind of a more extreme measure you could consider would be putting in a center median on 72nd Street, which would completely prevent all vehicles from exiting left. We would have to consider the impact to emergency vehicles and large vehicles. But as far as the street reconstruction, I believe as Carrie Teague mentioned, we are scoping out a sanitary sewer improvement project within the broader neighborhood that will necessitate reconstructing 72nd Street. That project is tentatively slated for 2025 or 2026. So as part of that project, again, it's gonna necessitate rebuilding 72nd Street. So we could look at narrowing the street, we could look at medians, pork chops, things like that at that time to help calm traffic.
So it's possible to do something immediately and possible to do something grander in the next 2 years.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Member Pierce.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I wanted to circle back, Mr. Carlson, because you asked the question when you gave your comments. I just want to clarify that the comments that I am sharing is really based on process. And so I think it is good for us to make a decision to just make sure we're making that decision from the same data set. Maybe I'd say it that way. And so we probably had 5 or 6 different perspectives on traffic tonight, right? And we had some great suggestions on how we might eliminate and calm some of the traffic. But I think it's difficult from my perspective to be making a decision like this with not as much clarity as I'd like to have, I'd put it that way, with some of the data sets. And then I think we all had questions from the neighbors. And so being able to dive into that and figure out, all right, well, what can we do? What should we do to be able to address some of those issues? And so that's where my perspective is coming from. And I've said it is not, when we have challenges like that we need to go through, you kind of are looking behind the curtain on some of this. And so I think we do need to take that time to go through and just clarify, this is the data that we're utilizing. This is what happened in 2018 or 2019 or what have you, right? But this is the data set that we're going to use, and be able to bring that back so that we have really crisp clarity around how what data we're using to make the decision. And so I would offer a motion to table this and then allow time for staff to be able to go through that process to just clarify what data set that we're using, as well as we have a couple of emails that we can also, most of those are geared towards some of the traffic concerns. We can do an analysis on those and then be able to bring back recommendations on what we may do there. And if I understand in that motion, we would be looking at having that back the first meeting in October to council.
Kind of begs the question, assuming you get a motion or a second on the motion, are we okay on the 60-day rule?
We are. The 60-day rule expires October 15th.
Okay. So your motion would be to table this matter until the first meeting in October 1, is that it?
Yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, with the directive to staff.
Yes.
To do the things that you just described, which were getting the data tightened up.
Yep.
With respect to traffic, with respect to the PUD.
Yep.
Past resolutions.
Yep.
Past ordinances, all those things.
Yep.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Matters continued to the first meeting in October 1st, I believe, with the expectation that all this data that Member Pierce has talked about would be gathered and we'd have available to us.
Great, thank you.
Then we'll have a full council too. That's good to have one more perspective. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. All right. And then we had, this was a carryover from, I think, Member Risser. It's the minutes of the regular city council meeting on July 16th, 2024. Are those in our packet or where? Online or?
Yeah, they're in the packet.
Okay. Finding them. Are they redlined? Here, I'm pulling them up.
No, I didn't see them. Yeah, it was the third.
See, I don't see it. I don't see the redlining. Oh, here. It's not red. It's just underlined. Okay. So, Manager Neal, I'm going to let you comment on this. I know that, I think, Member Risser, you supplied this information to Manager Neal or to staff.
Correct.
And requested that the meeting minutes of July 16th, 2024 be modified to include the underscored language in the proposed set of minutes. Is that a fair statement? Member Risser?
Yes, that is correct.
And then Manager Neal, your comments?
My only comments are that we've had a previous conversation about this in our meeting minutes standards. The council did not change our standards. We've prepared the proposed meeting minutes using those standards. Councilmember Risser has prepared the amendment to them. These are your meeting minutes, of course, to decide how you're going to record the minutes. We haven't changed our standards and don't advocate for this change, but they are your meeting minutes, and it is your discretion to determine what standards are being used.
Member Risser, I'll let you comment, please.
The minutes, as written, I think should reflect the really key things that happen in a meeting and the discussion. And I think it's important that code be part of the dialogue, particularly in this case. And I understand that references to code aren't required by staff, that's not what they're looking for. I understand it's a very minimal kind of way of recording what happened, but I think for the record, it is really important to have that detail. So I would, this is why I took the time to do it, and I think it is important to add.
Thoughts of, yes, Councilmember Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I respect your point about wanting to get things on record, Member Risser. But I want to take a bigger step back. This is a sketch plan. A sketch plan is not designed to create new ordinance, to create new authority of any kind. It's actually feedback for the developer so that they don't get too far down their development plans, spending a lot of money on something that then is not going to work. So the audience for a sketch plan is actually the developer. It's not the general public setting rules and terms. This is a point that I think would be really good to raise if they come back to us with an actual development idea. And, I would advise you to, advise staff to address this issue in their staff memo when they come back. But the purpose of a sketch plan, and I know you'll disagree with me on this, but the purpose of a sketch plan isn't to create new law or new authority, but to just give the temperature of the council to a potential development.
Good point. I understand that. We have had multiple sketch plans for this site. They have all had entrances and exits off of Vernon, which is an arterial road. And I think it's important to note that according to our code, that really does not appear to be allowed. And so I think that is a valid point to make in this context, because we keep getting plans that have that. But, I hear what you're saying. I also understand that even in resolutions, we can put content in resolutions, not just in minutes, but if you look at Resolution 2017-103, in our resolution, we state that we're going to turn all these parcels into PCD1 for purely residential housing, which also goes against code. So I guess maybe this is the night where we just really recognize that code is not really followed, but, or at least in resolutions, it doesn't really matter, or minutes. So on that note, thank you.
Other thoughts? Councilmember Pierce?
I wasn't quite following the last conversation. I wasn't sure what we were what we're being asked here. At first, I thought it was, we were just taking a motion to approve the minutes with the edits.
That's it? Yeah.
Okay. So then, but we're not suggesting that we change the way we do minutes, just, are we?
Well, I think the comment from, at least my understanding, was that Manager Neal was saying the level of detail that's provided here with this proposed amendment to the minutes is outside the scope of our policy.
Got it.
Because we're in a more...
Okay.
And
Thank you.
And I'm saying it's your discretion to do that if you wish. They are your meeting minutes.
Yeah.
And then Member Jackson raised the point about this was sketch plan review. And I would add that I think we should stick with our policy.
Yeah.
And I further think that
I agree with that.
the proposed amendment alludes to the fact that the council said this and the council said that. Well, the entire council didn't say that. So it's an inaccuracy on top of it, and plus outside the scope of, at least in my opinion, outside the scope of our policy.
So, yeah, I'm sorry. I agree with you, Mr. Mayor. I think if our policy, if we're following policy, I think we should continue to follow policy. We should be process honoring from that perspective. If there's a concern still that our minutes are not covering data or information, Member Risser, that you think it should, then I think that's probably the route to go through, is to say, well, making a recommendation of how our policy should change and why. But this is just saying, I think, so that I think for me that means for this, we should take the vote as to whether or not we leave the amendments in there or not.
Yeah, so I think, you know, if we want a higher level of detail that is different from the scope of our existing policy, we ought to have collectively that discussion. That's what you're saying.
That's what
I think
I'm suggesting.
that's a great point. So I think, our clerk has two sets of minutes in here, one original and one with the amendments proposed by Member Risser. So the first set of minutes in there for July 16, 2024 reflect the work of the clerk. And those would be I would first entertain a motion. Do we want to adopt the minutes of the regular meeting of the Edina City Council for July 16, 2024 as produced by our clerk?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion second to adopt the minutes of the regular meeting of the Edina City Council for July 16, 2024, as those minutes were produced by our clerk. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Carried. Minutes of the regular meeting of the City Council prepared by our clerk, Sharon Ellison, are adopted. Thank you. Now, we're on to city manager comments, and we've got this performance review situation, and we talked about appointing a subcommittee of 2 council members to review the proposals and make a selection recommendation of the full council. I don't know if Manager Neal, you want to say anything as a predicate, and I'm going to. You've gotten a couple of volunteers, which I think is great, and I'm going to ask them to affirm their willingness to serve in this capacity.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, the Assistant City Manager, Lenz, has facilitated an RFP process that resulted in 7 different applicants or proposals. I'm looking for a subcommittee of council members to review those proposals and to make a recommendation back to the full City Council for approval. We would provide, Ms. Lenz and I would provide logistical support to the group, but of course that decision about recommendation comes directly from your colleagues.
Let me ask Member Risser, Member Pierce, if they'd be willing to serve in that capacity.
Yep.
Yes.
Do you want some formal motion of appointment, or is that, I think?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Okay. Is there a motion to appoint a subcommittee of Member Pierce and Member Risser to review the proposals and make a selection recommendation to the full City Council for the City Manager's annual performance review?
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? Member Jackson moves, Member Pierce seconds the adoption of the motion as stated, involving the appointment of a subcommittee of our 2 council members, James Pierce and Julie Risser, to review the proposals for a facilitator to make a selection recommendation to the full City Council on this relative to the City Manager's performance review. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Motion's adopted. And then, City Manager, any other comments?
No other comments tonight. Thank you.
And let's go to Member Pierce for any comments of council members.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had just an update, and I thought this was kind of cool. So I'm the council member representative on the I-494 Corridor Commission. And so Southwest Transit has signed a 3-year contract with May Mobility to provide, to integrate autonomous vehicles for micro transit services in Eden Prairie. And so I thought this was kind of a neat deal. And so I was asking questions about, well, how can you expand the service? The intent behind the service is that it's kind of a last mile type of a deal. They're going to operate from Monday to Saturday initially, 5 to 7. They're estimating that it's saving, they'll save around $500,000 with this. Should be available around this fall. But then this was the criteria. You can't have roads that the speed limit is higher than 35. Doesn't go over any railroads. There are some inclement weather type challenges, but they think they've addressed all of those issues for our climate. And then the other one I thought was interesting, for ADA assistance. And so these are, I think these are like minivans, but the newer kinds of minivans are a lot smaller than the old style. And so initially they will have an attendant will be behind the wheel in case someone who's in a wheelchair needs to get on and then the wheelchair needs to be locked. And so if you're in Eden Prairie, you might see May Mobility out with if you remember when Google did their mapping, you'd see the van out with the camera. So they're doing, that's what they're doing now. They're kind of optimizing their routes, looking for things now that are things you can't plan for. And so in the meeting, they gave the example of on one of the routes, there was a bunch of turkeys. I don't know, it's not a school of turkeys. I don't know what it is. What is it called? A rafter of turkeys. And so the vehicle, when it gets to something it doesn't know, it stops. And then there's a control center that has cameras and everything. And the control center can say, oh, those are turkeys. It gets programmed into the AI model. And so next time it sees turkeys, it'll stop, wait for the turkeys to cross, and then it'll keep going. Their price point to start this, I think it's $5, which I think is what their current price is for typical transit. But I thought that was neat. And I think they're starting with 5 or 6, somewhere in that neighborhood of vehicles. And it's in the Golden Triangle. I never had heard that term, but I know what that is now. So I thought that was pretty neat. Yeah.
It's just going to operate in the Golden Triangle?
Yeah, just in the Golden Triangle primarily.
Which has the ability to serve just that little smidge of a
Right.
Yeah. So I thought it was pretty neat to see.
Yeah, Waymo, where's Waymo based? Is that a California-based company? Do you know?
May Mobility or?
Oh, it's not Waymo, it was May Mobility.
May Mobility, yeah. And they do Grand Rapids? They have this almost fully autonomous. I think it's in an area in Grand Rapids. To start out, they felt like they'd be probably, it'd be less than 90% fully autonomous. But they think they could get to a point where they're 95. I think the one in Grand Rapids might be 100%. But solving the challenge of ADA, they still have to kind of figure out how they're gonna do that. But I thought it was, and then the other thing that I thought was neat, it's a point-to-point type of a deal. So they have their own app. And so you go on the app and you ask for this type of mobility. And it would be similar to Uber, where if you're in a downtown area where your Uber might say, well, I'll pick you up, on this corner. And the model is built so that the furthest you may have to do is like maybe a 5-minute walk to that pickup location. But that's where the vehicle will meet you, and then you get in, and then it goes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
Good for Eden Prairie. Member Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So August 22nd, this Thursday, is Get Connected Day at the high school, and it's also Band Together by the Ed Fund. So I'm looking forward to it. Get some live music, lots of different kinds of things. They're going to be there all day, and it should be a lot.
All night.
And all night, yeah.
Like 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. or something.
Yeah, it's a long event, and it should be pretty fun. So they've got some high school players, some professional players, all different levels of music presented. So it should be awesome.
Mercer.
I actually don't have anything tonight. Thank you.
One thing for me, we talked a little bit about, maybe a couple of months ago now, that we'd had that, I call it AI 101 presentation out of Microsoft for the Regional Council of Mayors. Well, we've got them all lined up now for September 9th. And do you remember the time, Scott? Was it 5 o'clock? And we're going to meet so it's going to be us and the school district and any staff from the school or the city that wants to get this AI 101 presentation from Microsoft. And I was thinking it was 5 o'clock in room 345. And we'll let Jennifer Garsky or somebody let everybody know. Yeah. And Stacy's got everything lined up over on her, and all the be a chance for us to meet with our colleagues over at the city over at the school board as well. Yeah, yeah, we're all expected to attend, so that's the only thing I had. Well, we got pretty close to the clerk's estimate of meeting time. Is there anything else for the good of the order tonight? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second? We get a motion, a second to adjourn. Motion by Member Jackson, second by Member Pierce to adjourn the city council meeting for the city of Edina this Tuesday, August 20th, 2024. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjournment of the city council meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned.